Hi there, I'm Debbie Wilson, and I just wanted to do a quick little video to talk about some events in history that led up to the point that we are now, and how did we get here where we have strayed somewhat from the teachings of Messiah. And before I do that, I just want to remind everyone that the church as we have it today, we still have the most important things. We have the weightier matters. We have a good understanding of how we should take care of the widows and the orphans and the strangers, the homeless. Those I think are the things that are the nearest and the dearest to the heart of Messiah. So as I go through this, just keep in mind that although we have strayed somewhat, we're just tweaking things, because I think we still have, like I said, the most important things. So let's get into this. So the first believers in the first century, they were Jewish, and Messiah Yeshua, he was Jewish, and he was a teacher. He was a rabbi. He was a teacher of the Torah. They lived and walked and they taught God's laws. And Yeshua, Jesus, he came and to bring correction. And he did correct the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the people. He corrected their thoughts and their ideas about how they should live and what the scriptures actually said. So when Yeshua came, the people of the Jewish faith received their Messiah. And they continued to go to the temple and the synagogues. They kept the Sabbaths and the biblical festivals and all of God's instructions. Then when Paul came along and he began to teach to the Gentiles, they also continued to meet in synagogues at the beginning. The Gentiles were considered to be grafted into Israel and actually kind of became citizens of Israel, so that all the promises that had belonged to Abraham belonged to them as well. They don't replace Israel. They are branches that are grafted in. So now the non-believing Jews, they were not necessarily okay with these believers coming into the synagogues, and eventually they did kick them out. Of course, we know that there was a Jewish revolt against Rome, and Rome eventually destroyed Jerusalem and its temple. At this time, the Jewish believers remembered what Yeshua said, that when they were to see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, that they were to flee. They were to go to the mountains. They were not wait for anything. They were just to get out of town. And so they did. And this did not set very well with the Jews, who considered them to be traitors and cowards because they didn't stay and fight with them. So they were cast out of the synagogues. The Jewish believers were were enemies of Rome, and not just the Jewish believers, but the Gentile believers as well. So they were enemies with the Jewish people, but they also became enemies of Rome as well, because Rome, the national religion was Mithraism, or sun worship, and the believers didn't honor their festivals, and they didn't honor the emperor as a god. So basically they had to worship in secret. And then after the Bar Kokhba revolt against Rome, again, the Jewish people against Rome, it became punishable by death to keep the Sabbath or the festivals or any of the Jewish things. So it became such a risky behavior to walk according to God's laws that in the 2nd century, one of the church leaders, or the church fathers, Ignatius, he wrote to the congregations of Asia. Now that's where John had fled to, and that he wasn't alive at that time, of course, but those congregations sprang out of his teachings. So Ignatius wrote and told those people not to be keeping the Sabbath anymore. He said, well, obviously they were still honoring the Sabbath, or there would be no need for him to write. During this time also, there was a false writing that was circulating called the Epistle of Barnabas. Now, this was a well-known forgery, and it slandered the Jews, and it condemned all of God's instructions. And then there came a movement that was led by the heretic Marcion. And this man claimed that Jesus had unseated the evil God of the Old Testament. And so he threw out all the writings of the Old Testament and just cut it off and separated it as from the old God and the new God, Jesus. And the only writings that he would allow were the writings of Paul and the book of Acts, and all the Gospels gone, everything. So the Church of Rome called him a heretic, which he was. And however, this anti-Jewish, anti-Torah concept caught on, and these Marcionite churches sprang up all over the place. So in the 2nd century also, the believers sometimes they had a Sunday service as well as the Sabbath. And with all the anti-Semitism in place now, the Roman Church ordered the people to just celebrate a Passover Sunday. Instead of doing like, we have the Passover, and then we have the week, the 7 days of unleavened bread, and in the middle there is the Feast of First Fruits, that is the Resurrection Day. So they did away with all of that, and they said, we just want you to celebrate just Passover Sunday, and, don't be like the Jews, And so they got rid of that. And then along came Constantine. Now, when I was in school, in history, we studied Constantine when I was in high school. And I remember he was presented as this wonderful hero that legalized Christianity for the first time. No longer did the Christians have to be thrown to the lions. Well, it wasn't exactly like that. Constantine was a sun worshiper who supposedly became a Christian. However, when he became an emperor, he had a coin minted that had himself as a Christian on one side, and he had the sun worship or Mithraism on the other side. He never really gave it up. At the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, basically he merged Christianity and Mithraism. He moved the Sabbath to Sunday because all the sun worshipers were worshiping on the venerable day of the sun. And so he got them all worshiping on the same day. And he proclaimed that it was against the law to observe the Sabbath anymore on the 7th day, or on or to do any of the biblical festivals. And just know, though, that we have lots of evidence that there was always a remnant. There were always these groups here and there across the world of believers that continued the faith. And they continued the Sabbath day. They kept it holy. Let's go on here. So at this point, you're probably thinking, well, what really matters is what's in your heart, right? And I'm just going to worship God. He understands. So let's move on here, and let's just look to see what God does think, because God never changes, right? He's the same. So if you read the account of the golden calf incident in Exodus chapter 32, and if you read it very carefully, you will find that Israel was not worshiping that calf exactly, and they weren't worshiping one of the other gods. They made that golden calf to represent Yahweh, God, the Creator, that brought them out of the land of Egypt. That's what it says. The reason this was not okay is because that the Father had told them so many times and in so many ways not to serve him the way the other nations serve their gods. They're not supposed to make graven images. So these nations had their own festivals and customs and graven images that represent their gods. And apparently those customs and traditions were a lot of fun because Israel got pulled into that frequently. So, but the Father says, sorry, I didn't write down where I got this from, but I quoted this. He said, "Whatever I command you, be careful to observe it. You shall not add to it nor take away from it." Because this part is my part. It's not a quote. I'm giving you my interpretation. He is saying to us that adding or subtracting from what he tells us to do results in a corruption. So let's consider also the story of Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu. So the setting is that the tabernacle had just been built and they were all very excited, and they just had this amazing ceremony of consecrating the tabernacle. The glory of Yahweh came down in front of all the people. He appeared to all the people, or his glory did. And fire came out from his presence and consumed the offering, and all the people fell on their faces before him. Then Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, apparently got excited and decided to do their own form of worship. They each took their fire holder, they put incense on it, and they brought strange fire before the Lord, before Yahweh, which he had not commanded them. So fire shot out from the presence and just consumed them, and they died right then and there. Now, we don't know where they got the fire or why they decided to add to the ceremony, but obviously our Creator considered this to be a very serious offense. God is holy, and he's very specific about how we are to worship him. He has a plan, and this plan is for our good. Let's consider what a verse in Ezekiel chapter 22 and verse 26, and I'm going to quote this. "Her priests have done violence to my teachings and profaned my set-apart matters. They have not distinguished between the holy and the profane, nor have they made known the difference between the unclean and the clean. And they have hidden their eyes from my Sabbaths, and I am profaned in their midst." So, although our Father has been very merciful towards us in our religious mixture that has developed over time and that we innocently have adopted and we've done all our lives, and our fathers and mothers before us have worshipped in these ways that were actually kind of a mixture. But I feel that now, in this day, he is revealing the truth to us, and he is moving us into that straight and narrow path that he would have us to walk in. He's restoring us. He's restoring that way that he wants us to walk, and he's bringing us back to him. So it's an exciting time, and I hope that you'll continue along this journey with me and just find our way back to that straight and narrow pathway and that gate that so few find. Thank you for listening. All right, we'll see you later. Bye.